All right, let's get right into it. For years, maybe decades, companies have been trying to tackle diversity. You've seen it, right? They've launched all these programs, made big pledges, hired diversity officers. But if we're honest, a lot of the time, real change feels incredibly slow. But what if all that effort, even with the best intentions, is totally missing the point? What if it's aimed at the wrong problem entirely? That's the big idea we're digging into today.
So where do most people start? Well, they start looking for the rotten apples. You know, the idea that the problem is just a handful of bad actors, a few people with some really outdated views that we just need to find and get rid of. The thinking goes, if we can just fix or remove those problem people, the whole culture will magically heal itself.
But the analysis we're looking at here pushes back on that, and hard. The argument is, listen, it's not the apples, it's the barrel they're in. The problem is baked right into the systems, the processes, even the unwritten rules of our companies. In other words, it's systemic.
And that brings us to this really crucial concept, systemic prejudice. And what's so important about this definition is that it's not about individual people being bad. It's about a collective blindness. It's kind of like the water we're all swimming in, but we don't even notice it's wet. This is the very same idea that's at the heart of huge social movements like Black Lives Matter and #MeToo. They're all about challenging these invisible, built-in systems of power.
Okay, so to tackle this system, we've got to be super clear on our terms. Because honestly, this is where a lot of the confusion happens. This chart lays it out perfectly. Diversity, that's the mix. It's just about who's in the room. But inclusion, that's about making the mix actually work. It's about who really has a voice, who feels like they belong, and who gets a fair shot. One's about representation, the other is all about opportunity.
And wow, this quote from an employee survey just cuts right to the chase. This person is basically saying, hey, stop counting me like I'm a statistic. I'm not here to be your diversity token. What people really want isn't to be pointed at as diversity. It's to get the same fair shot, the same opportunities, and the same quality of leadership that everybody else gets. It's that simple.
And that's the thing. This isn't just some feel-good, nice-to-have initiative. Not at all. This is a straight-up business imperative. So let's get into the data, because the financial case for building an inclusive culture, it's actually staggering.
Take a look at this number, 25%. So what is that? Well, there was this massive study back in 2017 by Nordea. They looked at 11,000 companies all over the world. And this was the annualized return for companies that had a woman in the top job, either as CEO or as the chair of the board.
And this chart is where that 25% gets really wild. If you compare it to the MSCI World Index average of just 11%, well, you can see companies led by women more than doubled the market's performance. The numbers don't lie. If you'd put your money in female-led companies, you would have made a whole lot more of it.
So, why? What's going on here? Well, research shows that when you're in a group where everyone looks and thinks just like you, it's really easy to get complacent. But when you know you're going to be challenged by different points of view, you come more prepared. You do your homework. That little bit of friction, that diversity of thought, it just forces everybody to be sharper, better questions get asked, and in the end, you just make smarter decisions.
Okay, so the business case is crystal clear, but how do you actually do it? How do you build an inclusive culture for real? Well, let's look at a roadmap. Because it's not about just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's a strategic, continuous cycle.
And here it is. They call it the Wheel of Cultural Transformation. And the logic? It's actually really simple, but it's super powerful. You start with drive. That's the why. You get your leaders on board. Then, knowledge. You find out the what by actually gathering data from your own people. Only then do you build a strategy for how to fix the right problems before you finally take action. And here's a huge warning. So many companies, they feel this pressure to be seen doing something, right? So what do? They skip right to step 4. They just jump into action, launch a training program, start some new committee, but without doing the hard work of drive, knowledge, and strategy first, those actions are just pure guesswork. And worse, they can actually backfire, creating cynicism when they, inevitably don't work.
Now, what's so cool about that knowledge step is how it lets you use your own internal data to just shatter the myths that are holding you back. You might hear leaders say something like, well, women just aren't ambitious enough. But then your own data comes back and shows the complete opposite. Or you'll hear that old excuse, there just isn't enough minority talent out there. When the data reveals the real problem is your company's failure to recognize the incredible talent that's already right in front of you.
So you've got your roadmap. Now what? What are the actual tools you can use to make this happen?
This is where we get into some really fascinating hands-on techniques for leaders.
So think about this for a second. How do you get a room full of powerful executives to talk about the things that nobody ever wants to talk about? You know, the subtle biases, the quiet frustrations, the stuff that makes up the real culture but never shows up in a report. How do you get that out in the open?
The answer, and you probably wouldn't guess this, is with Lego. No, seriously, there's this incredible method called Lego Serious Play. And the idea behind it is that when we use our hands to build things, we tap into a different part of our brain. It lets us express these really complex feelings and ideas that are sometimes just too hard to put into words.
And there's this one story from a workshop that, wow, it shows you the power of this perfectly. A female executive, she built this model to show what her experience was like, being constantly overlooked, interrupted, and ignored. And she described the feeling as death by 1,000 cuts. And when her male colleagues saw that experience, that feeling, made real in a physical model, it had this profound visceral impact. A hidden reality suddenly became visible to everyone in the room.
So beyond just tools, inclusive leadership really comes down to a set of core traits, or intelligences. And when you look at this list, the big takeaway is that it's less about policies and ticking boxes, and way more about perception. It's about humility, empathy, self-awareness, and having a genuine curiosity about how other people see the world.
Okay, now we have to talk about what many people call the single biggest barrier to all of this: unconscious bias. Think of it like this. Our brains are kind of lazy. They love taking shortcuts to save energy. But those shortcuts, those automatic patterns, lead directly to stereotypes. Our brain sees a pattern and just fills in the blanks, usually without us even having a clue that it's happening.
So how in the world do you fight something that's unconscious? Well, here's the key insight. Just making people aware of it in a training session isn't enough. The real strategy is twofold. First, you use your data to see exactly where bias is doing the most damage. Then, you have to deliberately intervene in those moments, like when you're hiring or promoting someone, by consciously practicing what's called thinking slow. You have to literally force yourself to hit the brakes on your gut reactions and question your own assumptions.
This slide just sums up the whole shift in thinking perfectly. On one side, you've got the old, ineffective way, these programs to fix women, random initiatives based on guesswork, and on the other side, you have the approach that actually works: full ownership from leaders, data-driven strategies, formal sponsorship programs to level the playing field, and real, genuine flexibility.
So, where is this all going? What's the future of this work? Well, this last part argues that we're really at a tipping point.
And let's be really clear about this. This is quickly moving from being a strategic advantage to being a flat-out survival issue. Younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, they just have completely different expectations. They actively look for employers with good values, and they have way less patience for toxic cultures. Companies that don't get this right, they're simply not going to be able to attract or keep the next generation of talent.
And that brings us to one last, pretty provocative thought. What if the real end goal here isn't just about managing diversity better? What if the goal is to create a culture that's so truly inclusive that we can finally move beyond all the labels and all the boxes? A place where diversity is just so normal, we can stop talking about it all the time and just focus on our shared humanity. It's a powerful idea, isn't it? And it kind of leaves us with a question. What's one step we can take today to get a little closer to that future?